Hi everyone, welcome to another masterclass in Montgomery County Community College's SRT program. That stands for Sound Recording and Music Technology. I'm not going to bother to introduce myself because I think you all know me. Today we have a very special guest who's going to talk to us about something really important. You've all heard me drone on and on about this all week leading up and all last week leading up to this, protecting your hearing. So I'm not going to give you a long-winded thing again, but just remember, the most important piece of equipment you have if you want to work in the world of audio is your ears. Okay? You need to protect them. It's very, very crucially important because a lot of you are probably going to be working in loud environments and live sound. So make sure you take this stuff seriously. Okay? So I am very pleased to welcome to our campus Dr. Alexandra Costlow. She is an audiologist from Jefferson Hospital in the, and I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly, otolaryngology department. Did I get it right?
You did.
Fantastic.
Indeed.
All right. Yay, pronunciation. So she is going to talk to us about hearing protection and what goes on inside your ears and hearing health. So I'm going to turn this over to her. Please welcome Dr. Costlow.
Thank you all for having me here today. I'm excited to speak on the topic of hearing conservation. I was just a couple minutes ago explaining to Howie that this presentation was actually adapted from one that I presented to student musicians. So I hear that some of you are in the sound recording program, others are in the music program, probably many of you, there's a good amount of crossover. So hopefully you find some good information. And to his point, we'll talk about the importance of protecting your hearing, really as one of the most important assets you have for working in the music and audio recording industry. So the objectives for today's presentation are to increase awareness of safe listening levels, to increase awareness of noise exposure sources, increase awareness of hearing protection devices, and finally, to increase awareness of resources for information and guidance. So, why are we here today? Why is hearing conservation important? And why is it particularly important in your future professions? So, a couple ideas. Most importantly, the longevity of your career arc. So, hearing loss becomes more prevalent with age. In fact, 50% of people over age 50, which is far off for many of you, have some degree of hearing loss. However, most people go on to work much later in life through their 50s, into their 60s, even into their 70s. So it's important to protect the hearing at the outset to preserve the longevity of your career. It's also important to nurture and protect your craft. Audio recording, is definitely, it's a profession, it's a skill, but many who work in the music industry also, they're audiophiles, they're musicians, they go to concerts, they enjoy sort of the artistry of music. To protect your livelihood, if you have sound-induced, noise-induced hearing loss, it could affect your ability to work. Simple enjoyment of music, enjoying what you are recording, what you're producing, the musicians you work with. It's also important to conserve your hearing in terms of overall health and wellness, just like you would your vision, your any other sense. The other thing is you'll set a proper example to others, future students, industry professionals, the musicians you work with, and also the general public. Perhaps you can think of other reasons why it might be personally important to you to protect your hearing. So the most common question we get in my profession as an audiologist from patients, they'll ask us about specific noise sources. For example, they might say, what about using a hairdryer? And really there are two components to whether that noise level could be harmful to the hearing. So noise is measured in a dose. So the two components are the intensity, so the decibel level, and also the duration. So considering those two factors, we can determine if a certain noise source, like a hairdryer, might be harmful to the hearing. And in fact, there are two organizations that measure and dose noise. The most common one that people have heard of is OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Most commonly, OSHA goes into workplaces to determine if the noise level could be harmful to employees' hearing. NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, also does similar. But the way in which OSHA and NIOSH measure and dose sound varies. For OSHA, they've determined that the permissible exposure limit is to be exposed to 90 decibels of sound for 8 hours. Furthermore, for every 5 decibels of increase of sound, the safe permissible exposure limit is halved. So what that means is, if the sound level of the equipment or the music or whatever sound source is 95 decibels, you could reasonably be exposed to it for 4 hours before noise-induced hearing loss could occur. At a 5 decibel increase at 100 decibels, which is exceedingly loud, probably most commonly heard in a construction setting, concert venues, the permissible exposure limit is only 2 hours, and at 105 decibels, it is simply 1 hour. In comparison, NIOSH has a more conservative method to determine the recommended exposure limit. What that means is, in comparison to OSHA, who has determined that you could reasonably be exposed to 90 decibels of sound for 8 hours, NIOSH actually recommends a lower exposure limit of 85. For every 3 decibel increase of intensity, however, the time is halved. So again, a more conservative estimate. If you increase the sound level to 88 decibels, the recommended exposure limit is 4 hours. At 91 decibels, 2 hours, and at 94 decibels is only 1 hour. Now going back to OSHA, at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that they have determined that you could be exposed to 105 decibels for 1 hour, whereas NIOSH, the more conservative estimate, recommends only 94 decibels for 1 hour. So given that, I would recommend that in your profession that you would refer to the NIOSH standard, a more conservative estimate to protect the hearing. What does all that mean? How loud are everyday sounds? What about a car in traffic, a truck or a hairdryer? I'm going to ask the attendees for some sound estimates. How about a car in traffic? Does anyone want to estimate what the decibel level of your car in traffic might be on 76? You can either raise your hands or an orange.
Without music, I'd probably guess around, without blaring loud music type stuff, I'd probably guess around the 80 to 90 range.
Okay. What about riding in a large truck? Any?
Windows up or windows down?
We'll do windows up. Sir?
I'm gonna say 105.
105, okay. And how about a hairdryer? When you just drying your hair, maybe nightly or a couple times a week. Any guesses?
108.
108?
Yeah.
All right. Let's look. So this is a little bit small. So there are different sound measurements, but let's see. So the car in city traffic, the gentleman estimated, what was it, 80?
Around 80 to 90.
80, yeah. So this noise survey found that it was about 70 decibels. Now, it's going to vary, right? Are you in your car with the windows up, no other traffic, immediate, probably 70, more reasonably 80. The truck, and this gentleman, remind me, what was your guess, 90?
I didn't guess anything. He guessed 105.
105, yeah. So this is saying about 80 decibels, but yeah. In a very large truck, a construction vehicle, the garbage trucks, the cement trucks, very well could be 100 or 105 decibels. And then the hair dryer, this gentleman suggested 108 decibels, and this is saying 90 decibels, but again, very well could be a range. And it depends the distance, if you're drying the hair from, a 2.5 foot distance versus close to the head. you very well probably could get over 100 decibels. So these common everyday exposures really do add up. If you think about the total amount of time that you're exposed to driving to work, drying your hair, riding in a truck or other loud vehicle. All right. Similarly, there are a lot of recreational noise exposures. So recreational simply means that you're not at your job, things like listening to music in the car, driving with the windows down in heavy traffic, exercise classes, when they've got that music blaring to get you going. If you go to a restaurant, perhaps they've got live music in the background. If you attend a wedding or other event with a DJ or a live band. Using power tools. How many of you have mowed your lawn or used a chainsaw? Yep, leaf blowers, all of those things that many people do on a weekly basis. Attending sporting events, Phillies games, 76ers games, certainly Eagles games can be exceedingly loud. Riding motorcycles, dirt bikes, four-wheelers. I'm sure many of you could think of other hobbies, going shooting, other sort of recreational activities in your own lives that do get quite loud. All right. What about for those of you in the audio industry? What are additional sources of noise? So the ones that I could think of would be, Howie showed me the beautiful studio you have, the main studio, recording for class, right? Whether you're learning from your professor or your peers, if you're practicing, you're in the studio with musicians with their instruments or singing perhaps. I was doing some Googling about audio recording, and it looks like there are all kinds of programs you can download at home or websites you can use. So any of that you might be doing at home. Learning new equipment in the studio or out. And then personal recording for those of you who are musicians. Are there any others that you could add to the list that I haven't thought of? That's okay.
When you're miking the snare drum, make sure the drummer doesn't hit the snare drum wall.
Yeah.
Another option is say you're doing editing, you're doing work like editing a podcast or something like that, and you need to listen to that.
Yeah, very good. I was thinking sort of too narrowly about music, but certainly podcasts, audio recordings, Sir in the Gray.
Producing/editing an instrumental track.
Okay, yep, another good one. And I'm going to take a guess that you probably spend quite a bit of time doing that. It's not a one and done 20-minute.
Repeating it over and over.
Listening intently, turning it up a little so you can really hear the components.
Mixing too loud in general is a thing you have to watch out for.
Sure. I think I saw another hand in the back.
Anything that has to do with live sound, like if you're mixing live sound.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just band rehearsals, just do it, not just recording.
Yeah, and to your point, previously when I presented to musicians, really that's what we focused on, was their practice sessions and rehearsals together, to be mindful of the the noise exposure, because again those sessions can run very long, right? You might practice by yourself for an hour or two, and then tack on a rehearsal for another hour or two, and you've had 4 hours at 90 decibels, and you're at your limit for the day. Sir?
I was thinking more of Foley sound. So currently working on a project of recording noises around.
Right.
Like you can record sound and you can not you can be like, oh, this sounds wrong. And then you put your headphones on and you're like, oh, dang, I kind of heard.
True. Yeah, great examples, great thoughts. Something definitely to keep in mind as you go about your day, about your education, and then when you step into your careers. All right, so how does sound really damage the ear? Why do we limit exposure? So excessive exposure to harmfully loud intensity levels damages the hair cells in the cochlea. So the cochlea is the inner ear organ for hearing. It's the green, here it looks yellow to me, back there it looks green. It's a snail-shaped organ. And hair cell damage to the cochlea can lead to temporary and generally permanent hearing loss, as well as tinnitus or ringing in the ears. I'm sure by show of hands, how many of you have attended a concert or event where the sound was exceedingly loud, and after the event, you walked out and you said, I hear some ringing, or maybe my ears feel full or dull. Yep, myself included, before I became a professional. So that is, yep. Those are those hair cells responding to the loud exposure that they've had. And those temporary exposures can lead to permanent hearing damage. Even if the ringing or the tinnitus or the fullness subsides, the damage has yet been done. So now that we've discussed the importance of protecting hearing, how do we measure sound? How could you reasonably know if something is too loud? A good rule of thumb is if it's uncomfortable, if you're averse, to the sound level, generally it is too loud. But now that we have smartphones and apps, we actually can measure sound. So NIOSH makes an app. It's a free app. Unfortunately, it's only available for Apple on iTunes, although there are many sound level meter apps available for Android. But NIOSH makes a free app that you can download that will measure several different metrics of the sound. Most importantly, the decibel level. It will tell you the noise dose that you've incurred. So for example, if the sound source is 85 decibels, you're maybe driving your car, you set the app down and you drive for, an hour, it'll tell you the noise dose that you've incurred based on the decibel level. Similarly, if you're in the studio and you're recording or working on equipment and it's 95 decibels, similarly that app will tell you the noise dose that you've incurred for the day. Or if you're a musician and you're recording or practicing by yourself or with a group, you can set that app down, the phone down, and the app will record several different metrics, including the peak sound, so you'll know the loudest sound that you've been exposed to. I recently went home to see my in-laws, and they have a German Shepherd who loves to bark, and we sat the app down to see how loud the dog barks. It was 117 decibels, so you might be surprised that the app will tell you one metric is it's weighting, so sound weighting. There are basically different ways that you can measure sound based on the frequencies that you pick up. So there are 3 different types of weighting. A weighting gives more weight to mid-frequencies of human hearing, which are important for understanding speech, and less to the low bass tones and high pitches. And this is the most commonly used method to measure measure sound for dosimetry or dosing. C weighting gives more weight to low frequencies than A weighting, and it mimics how the human ear hears sound over 100 decibels. Yes?
So with the A weighting, is that why on the previous slide you had the LAEQ for the equivalent sound of a weighting?
So LAEQ represents the equivalent sound level. It includes all the fluctuating measurements over time. It gives you like an average.
So is that similar to the A weighting, or it's very similar to like how the what the standard hearing is type stuff, or is it completely different?
So there's sort of different metrics. So you would use one of the weighting methods to determine LAEQ.
Okay.
Yeah, great question. And then Z weighting represents a flat frequency response. So it basically picks up all the pitches, doesn't cut out anything. This is very technical. And in fact, the next slide is a graphical representation of that information. For those of you who learn visually, I personally think that this explains the concepts a little bit better. And again, very technical. You really would only be using this if you were doing like a formal noise dosimetry study. All right, so best practices. What does all this mean? How should you go forward to protect your hearing? So one of the most important things that we've learned through studying musicians is the concept of auditory rest. So what this means is that when you've had a long day of practice or recording or simple noise exposure, that a 12-hour break of auditory rest helps the auditory system recover. It doesn't mean that you're going to plug your ears with earplugs and you're going to be in silence, but instead it means you might find quiet activities to do, right? Normal conversation, watching TV, reading, certainly sleeping would count so long as it's in a quiet environment. And then use of musician earplugs, at least during practice or recording sessions. So this is tricky because musician earplugs, I believe your professor Howie has spoken to you about his experience with them, really are intended for musicians. Certainly, they would be an asset to anyone in the recording industry as well. But we'll get into more options for our musician earplugs. Additional practices. Measure those sound levels. Know what your exposure is. Because earlier, like I was saying with my in-laws German Shepherd, you might be surprised how loud things are. Protect your ears and hearing outside of work, school, and recording. So if you are going to a concert, if you're going to an Eagles game, if you're going to be mowing the lawn, definitely use, at least earplugs, ideally ear muffs if you're doing lawn work. Not a bad idea to establish a baseline hearing test. So you would come into the office of an audiologist, we'd formally check your hearing, your word understanding, we'd check the hair cells in your inner ear, the eardrums. And I would recommend doing that sooner rather than later. Do it before you notice difficulty hearing or tinnitus or any other complaint. That way we can look back and say that in 2023 you had good, healthy hearing, and we can objectively say whether there's been change or not.
Quick question.
Yes.
Is there a correlation between, do we in higher frequencies tend to do more damage than lower frequencies, or is it just a matter of all frequencies involved?
That's a great question. So of note, noise-induced hearing loss tends to happen in the high frequencies first and most significantly. In fact, sometimes what we'll see is what we call a notched hearing loss. So what that means is the hearing will be normal in the low pitches, through the mid frequencies, and then it'll dip down for a pitch or two or three and come back to normal at the very highest pitch. Now over time, that generally progresses where it's normal in the low frequencies, normal in the mid pitches, and then it tapers off through all the high frequencies. So it usually progresses to a high frequency hearing loss. And that actually is due to the anatomy of the cochlea, where the hair cells that code for the high frequencies are affected first because they're more peripheral. And then, good, advice for anyone, musician or audiophile or not, but, definitely consult an audiologist or an ENT, an otolaryngologist if you have concerns. Don't put it off. I always say ear problems should be addressed sooner rather than later. Hearing is a sense, and so we certainly want to protect your senses, just like your vision or smell, over the lifespan. So custom musician earplugs. So there actually are two types of musician earplugs. The custom ones, you would visit an audiologist. We'd formally take an impression of the ear. So what we do is we put, it's called an O.D block. It's a sponge in the ear to protect the eardrum. We fill the ear with a soft putty, and then we actually have a mold of your ear made. And then you would select a filter. Usually it's 9, 15, or 25 decibels based on your needs. And these earplugs would only fit your ears. They come in every color. They should feel comfortable, secure. They should never hurt. Yeah. And then this is just a photo of what they look like both in the ear. So generally what you see at the periphery is the actual earplug, and at the center is the filter. And then this is just another photo of them. This little line actually is just for retention, so you can pull it out. It's not an antenna. And how do you know which filter to pick? So generally, engineers or sound producers use a 15 decibel filter. It maintains a more flat response. It really depends though. Like 10 decibels is not much. I rarely fit those. A 25 decibel filter is pretty significant. Like if you're a drummer, percussionist, electric guitar, serious concert goers, if you're going to be exposed to exceedingly loud sound for a full day, definitely that 25 decibel filter is going to be recommended. You also can get a solid plug that's not filtered that just simply cuts out as much sound as possible, probably about 32 decibels. And then earlier we passed out a brochure from a company called Phonak for, they're called Serenity earplugs. So these actually are musician earplugs, but they're non-custom. So there's like a flange that fits in the ear and then a 17 decibel filter. It's just a more affordable option, and then you can get them off the shelf. You don't have to see an audiologist. And then finally, I'm sure everyone has seen these, they're over-the-counter foam earplugs. So if you're in a bind, you happen to go somewhere and there's construction going on or some other loud sound and you just want to plug the ear, these are a really good option. They're inexpensive. You can find them on Amazon, at pharmacies. You can buy them in bulk, boxes of 200 or 300. Some people reuse them. I don't. I say they're one and done. And then there are different shapes of the custom of the OTC earplugs. So if you use one company and you feel like it doesn't stay in the ear, you can just switch to a different company. Some limitations, however, is that they might not fit all ears. Some people's ear canals are simply very small or narrow, and sometimes you have a hard time finding earplugs that fit. Retention, they're not going to fit as well as a custom earpiece. And then sound quality, it's going to make things sound muffled. On those OTC earplugs, there's something called a noise reduction rating. And this is basically a range of attenuation by which the earplug will reduce sound. So generally, the range is about 20 to 30 decibels. 30 is pretty liberal. Most foam earplugs probably reduce sound by about 20 to maybe 25 decibels. A higher noise reduction rating equates to more noise attenuation. So just something to keep in mind if you're looking on Amazon, that's what that noise reduction rating means. And there actually is, there's now guidance on how to interpret the noise reduction rating. So if you are going to be using these OT earplugs, I can send out the presentation, and this is a good way to conservatively estimate how much they're going to attenuate sound by. And then these are simply just a few more resources for additional learning. The Hearing Health Foundation is a objective foundation. It's not a manufacturer. Their goal is simply education. And then, of course, NIOSH and OSHA both have websites. And now I'd like to open the floor if there are any questions or anything at all that you had questions about in the presentation.
So, Howie said that previously there was a way that you could kind of get these cutout filters, maybe using these filter type things, that would then allow sometimes if you wanted to listen to put in your own music, and you could almost put in the what you could use in an earbud, and you could how would that exactly would that work?
Put in your monitor.
Yeah. I actually had a slide about that I cut. So in-ear monitors, generally musicians use them. So interestingly, they do provide some attenuation simply by closing the canal. But that assumes that the sound that's being fed in, the sound level that's being fed into them, correct. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Kind of just how exactly would that work?
How would?
The process of making sure that the filters and such would get being able to play something say I was working out, I still wanted to have them in and I wanted to listen to a little bit of music.
Oh, I see.
Having my bulky work headphones.
Gotcha. So let's think about this. So the best option would probably be, they make custom molds for AirPods or even earphones, the ones with the cords, that would provide attenuation of sound from the periphery. But again, that assumes that the decibel level of the incoming sound through Bluetooth or the DAI isn't exceedingly loud.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in the plaid,
So with any of the non-custom earplugs, like the silicone ones with the filter or the foam ones, how do you know if you have a good fit or not?
good question. So there actually is a video on YouTube from NIOSH that shows you how you roll and insert the OTC foam earplugs. So really the key is you're going to roll them and you're going to insert it in the canal and let it expand. Now, a proper fit should feel secure, right? You should be able to go about your day without them falling out. And if not, like if they feel like they're constantly coming out, I would just switch to a different company because there are some shape differences, material differences. Yeah. Was there another?
Big difference, like is there a big difference between the over-ear headphone, like the baby's wearing, like gun range ones, like, because like sometimes when I wear the in-ear ones, like they'll shake when I'm recording and it like vibrates in my ear and it like really, so those like, when they shake it doesn't bother me.
Yeah, so that's where the noise reduction rating would come into play. So generally the earmuffs that go over the ears do attenuate more greatly than the foam insert earplugs. Yeah, but there's usually a range. And so interestingly, when you look at the noise reduction rating, the lower end number is the average for minimally trained users, and the higher end number are for well-trained users. So really what that means is people like, firing range instructors probably achieve the 30 or 32 decibels, and somebody who just throws them on and they don't fit really well and they're loose, whatever, they don't have them over the ears properly, might achieve like 20 decibels of attenuation. I'm not sure why you would feel the vibration other than what I would recommend is when you roll the foam earplugs, try to insert it a little bit more deeply because the more...
I'm talking about like in-ear monitors.
Oh, in-ear monitors, yeah.
I would use them like as in-ear, because I don't have like, I mean, I could keep buying cheap ones, but I just use those as like ear protection, because they cut out, they're like 20 dB, something like that. I mean, they got wet, so I don't even know if they work like as in-ear monitors, but yeah, I don't know.
Gotcha. And were those custom made? No. That's probably why you're feeling the vibration, would be my guess. When you have a really secure, tight fit in the canal, that's going to minimize the risk of any vibration in the canal. Yeah. Yes.
If someone were to experience some minor amount of hearing loss, is there any way to help recover it?
It depends. So if it's, I'm presuming noise-induced, right, where you used a chainsaw or went to the concert and you notice your hearing feels worse, you're not hearing as well, the hearing could recover. So when we test the hearing on what's called the audiogram or the graph of the hearing, when you're experiencing that acute hearing loss, that's when we see that notched hearing. And generally that does recover. But the subclinical damage that's been done to the hair cells generally is permanent, even though on the audiogram or the graph of the hearing recovers. Generally, we recommend, again, auditory rest, in the future, limiting that noise exposure using earplugs or musician earplugs. But there's no medication or surgery that we could offer that would restore the hearing. Yes.
I guess kind of like a two-part question, but like, do you ever wear earplugs as like a precautionary thing, like in everyday life, if you're not going to be exposed?
Good question.
Yeah.
No. And in fact, we would recommend against that practice. Because interestingly, what we find is that earplugs should be used like a Tylenol for when you truly need it. Because if you prophylactically took Tylenol all the time, you would end up with unwanted or potentially harmful side effects, right? your stomach would hurt, could damage the liver. So when we see patients, sometimes this will happen, right? People have good intentions. Maybe they live in Center City, they walk around traffic all day, they hear the bus brakes screech, they hear SEPTA, whatever the case may be. They put earplugs in. They'll come into our office and say, I hear ringing all the time, or now I'm exceedingly sound sensitive. I can't tolerate normal level sounds. So when we plug up the ears, we actually reduce the amount of sound coming in, and your brain responds by becoming exceedingly sensitive to sound. So we would definitely not recommend that. Save them for when you truly need them. Yeah, that's a great question. Any others? But earplugs, hearing loss, sound levels. Yes.
What about like when you sleep?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say like in the summer, like I live in the city and it's really hard to sleep, and so I put earplugs into the phone once and then I fall asleep and they're in for like 8 hours.
Mm-hmm. So, right, it won't harm the hearing. If you do notice tinnitus, ringing, buzzing, noise in the ears, or that you're becoming sensitive to everyday sounds, I would try to go without them. A lot of people do that, right? They plug their ears because they got noisy neighbors or construction going on at 7 a.m. Generally it's fine so long as you don't notice side effects. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have price ranges for the different categories?
Yes. So also a good question. So the custom musician earplugs, let me see if I can go back. So these ones, because they're formally fitted, made custom to your ears, they tend to be pretty pricey. Like I would say we have in the past sold them for $250 per set. The price has gone up a little bit since then, maybe to $300 or $325 for the set, but they should last a long time, 5 years at minimum. We have many people who've had theirs for 10 years plus. And then the non-custom musician earplugs, probably in the ballpark range of $20 to $30 per pair. So much more affordable. Yeah.
Just for the record, some of you have already heard me say this, I got mine for about $200 like 25 years ago. So that breaks down to $8 a year. And I had tried a bunch of other kinds of over-the-counter plugs and things that are meant for musicians, and none of them sounded great. They all were very uncomfortable after like maybe an hour of wearing them. They really hurt. And when I got the custom ones, literally remember having this thought about the third song in, going, man, we're really quiet tonight. I forgot I was wearing them. They're that comfortable and they're that flat. So, I mean, you know, it's worth every penny. It really is. And most of these, now I have no experience with in-ear monitors. I've never done it, but some friends of mine have them, and basically it's you just take the insert out and you put the driver for the in-ear monitor in. And part of the reason I've never done in-ear monitors is I've heard from 2 different people about getting just absolutely blasted in the ear from somebody screwed up and, you know, drove the sound too hard. So, you know, unless I know there's a safety system involved, like I'm not going to do it. That's just me.
They aren't. So when it comes to like the needing of your phone, you said that I don't necessarily need them all the time. Say I'm doing a recording but it's more acoustic focused. It's a lot softer. Would I necessarily need them for that type of situation where it's not going to be going over like 90 to 100 decibels?
Yeah.
For a large amount of time.
It's, you know, that's what I was saying earlier. That's a great question. Hard to say, right? That's where those sound level meter apps can be really helpful in determining like the noise dose. Right, if it's acoustic and there's, you know, minimal amplification and it's at, you know, 85 decibels, in theory you could hear it all day. But again, just a minimal 5 decibel increase that reduces the, you know, permissible exposure limit to 4 hours. Or if it goes up, or actually that would be 85, 88, 91 would be 2 hours. So that's where using at minimum, one of these sound level meter apps can help you objectively determine what is a decibel level. It may sound soft. Generally what happens is when you're listening to music, like when you're in the car, you get in the car, you turn on the radio, and then as you continue to drive, you turn it up. And if any of you have ever gotten out of the car and then gotten back in and left, the volume at that level, you get in and you say, wow, was it really that loud? So generally people tend to become used to the sound level. So it's possible that it could be exceedingly loud and you're just not aware of it. So best to measure.
Tell them what the cure is for sensory neural hearing loss.
Yeah, great question. So sensory neural hearing loss, if it's caused by noise, generally there is no cure for it. The treatment would be hearing aids. And in cases where the hearing loss proceeds to deafness, a cochlear implant. So it's imperative to protect your hearing now as opposed to treat it later, because there's no pill we can give you. There's no surgery we can do to restore normal, healthy hearing.
How much are hearing aids?
Hearing aids range in price. A low-end hearing aid, a set of hearing aids, is about $1,000. Our most expensive hearing aids are $6,600 per set. I will tell you, given your profession, probably those are going to be the hearing aids that you want and really need. So, yeah, I think there's a saying about like an ounce of prevention is worth, much more later.
What I just want to say is that it's not just for the rock industry. There's a lot of articles coming up lately about classical musicians playing in orchestras for years, sitting behind the trombone section. And they've lost their hearing from that as well. And also there's a great list: Eric Clapton, Dave Grohl, Sting, Ozzy Osbourne. There's a huge list of all the musicians that you love. I just can't hear anyone. Just lost it.
And a common sentiment that we hear from not just musicians, but people who have lost their hearing is they wish they had known this when they were 15, 20, 25, or 30 years old. Right, because once you have permanent sensory neural hearing loss, it's gone. Yeah, that's a really good point to make.
And they're the headphone generation. Everybody's got it.
Yeah, everyone's plugged in. Yeah.
It's hard to measure the volume coming in when you have a headphone ear. You can't really measure that with that either.
Correct. Now, the iPhones, they limit it to some degree, yeah, but they don't tell you what the decibel level coming in is. They limit it, so, yes.
Is it still possible to get hearing loss even if you were like perfect about wearing really good earplugs?
Sure is. Could be genetic, could be autoimmune, it could be from a virus, it could be from a head injury, it could be from a known etiology, right? Like all day, every day we see people in the office with hearing loss, no family history, it's not syndromic, they haven't had a viral hearing loss, just aging, genetics, noise, all the sum total of the things that affect hearing over the lifespan. Yeah.
For those that are interested in the custom earplugs but maybe can't afford it, are there health insurance options or payment plans?
Yeah. I would recommend definitely check with your insurance, because some insurances might cover them. They generally don't in the vast majority of cases, but like some people who have high deductible health plans, there might be some coverage because you're just paying into the deductible, or if you have an HSA. I know this is probably most of you aren't on your own health insurance, but when you get into, like, if you have an HSA, you might be able to use HSA funds for it. Or go with the Phonak Serenity ones. It's better than no musician earplug at all. And at minimum, use these over-the-counter earplugs. If you're not in the studio and you're not playing music and you just want to protect your hearing. Yeah.
How like, you know when you like cover your ears and you can hear your own voice like more clearly, like if you're at a concert or something like that, do using earplugs kind of prevent that versus like you just cover your own ears? And is there a way to like kind of get rid of that, like to not hear yourself speaking through your?
So I think your question is, I think there are two parts here.
Yeah.
So if you plug your ears,
Yeah.
right, and you hear your own voice sort of louder, that actually is something called the occlusion effect. So when you plug the ear canals, which is just a tube, you are going to hear your voice louder, and that's normal and expected. Now, at concerts, if you're using earmuffs, was that your question?
Yeah, like if you're using earplugs.
Oh.
I've noticed sometimes that like it kind of leads to this undesirable effect.
Yes.
You can hear yourself.
Yes.
And you don't want to hear yourself at a concert.
Yes, that is also the occlusion effect. So if you put like those foam earplugs in your ears, so there's no filter, you're just plugging the ear canals, that can induce the occlusion effect. And actually, the fact that it's occurring suggests that you have a good tight fit, that you've really plugged the ear canals. Yeah, it's like an unfortunate byproduct. You're going to hear your own voice louder.
So it's not like an issue, but there's not really anything to do about it.
Correct, yeah. It won't harm your hearing, but there's no way to mitigate that other than using a filter. But then if you're at a loud concert, then you're letting more sound in, so yeah.
Also, how would you feel about using noise cancellation in your earplugs as like a headphone or like a concert?
So I always think noise cancellation earphones or earmuffs or whatever, I always say it's like a misnomer because you're inducing sound. Like they, produce like a low level, I honestly have never listened to them, but usually white noise or pink noise or rainfalls or something. So you are in one sense canceling sound, right? Because you're gonna have some noise reduction rating. You're gonna reduce the sound input that's coming in. But then you're trading that because you're going to put that low-level sound in the ear, which is fine. They're not going to damage your hearing, again, assuming that you're not listening to them at an unsafely loud level. I wouldn't recommend those for concerts because really the goal should be to reduce the peripheral sound coming in. I would save those for relaxation, when you're reading a book or trying to relax. I would say is that really their best utility.
I've seen a lot of people doing that at concerts, like keeping AirPods in, like using them as earplugs.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the fit. Yeah. Probably the noise reduction rating is going to be very minimal. I mean, like with a good fit, you might get 10 or 15 decibels. I doubt even 20, just based on the material. Like I have AirPods, and they sure do not fit my ears well. I don't think I would get much noise reduction rating at all. So it just depends on the ear canal anatomy, the fit. But yeah, those foam earplugs would be better than the AirPods. Yeah. Yeah.
This is more specific, this is less like audio recording related and more listening to music just for like personal enjoyment. But is there much of a difference in terms of like potential hearing damage, hearing loss effect between using like in-ear, like earbuds or AirPods or that, or headphones? Like, is there a noticeable difference there?
The difference between using AirPods versus headphones?
Yeah, like is one more likely to cause any kind of hearing damage, or is it about the same?
It's going to depend on the intensity level of the input, no matter the transducer, the AirPod or the earmuff. Yeah, great question.
So I like to listen to music like at the end of the day before I go to sleep. I was wondering, I usually do it with headphones because I don't really have like good speakers and I don't really get a full experience of it. But I was wondering if there's like a certain amount of time I should limit myself to when I'm listening. Like I know obviously I should keep the volume down. But I'm wondering if there's kind of a threshold to where hearing damage starts to happen.
So that would be the two organizations, OSHA and NIOSH. So I would abide by NIOSH's standard of 85 decibels. So if it's lower than 85 decibels, in theory, it shouldn't damage your hearing. If it's 85 decibels or greater, that's where we would look at those permissible exposure limits, where if it's 85 decibels and you have not had other loud exposure that day, in theory, you could listen to it for 8 hours and it would still be safe. Generally, when you listen to music, right at the end of the day or at your desk, it generally is not very loud. And hard to measure right through an AirPod. So I would just keep it at a moderate level. Or if you're listening through speakers, check out one of those apps and actually measure the sound intensity level.
Is it more dangerous to listen to something that has much more high end compared to something that has much more low end if they're the same volume?
No, it's based on the intensity level, not the pitch. Yeah, good question. Yeah, you guys really had great questions. Encompassed everything from recording to personal listening, sound exposure, transducers, earplugs. Yes.
When you're listening like in a car, is it better to have the windows up or the windows down?
In theory, probably having the windows down is going to expose you to more sound. So probably, it depends. It may not make much difference at all if it's you're driving in a quiet environment. Closing the windows probably reduces just the road noise. So there actually is noise created by the tires on the road and the car mechanics, right? Like all the components of the mechanical system. So closing the windows probably reduce that. I'm not sure by how much, but that would be, again, a good experiment, right? To drive in your car, have your sound level meter on, windows up versus windows down. And you can actually record sessions. So if it were me, I would hit play on the sound level meter with the windows up, with my music, record that for like a minute, hit stop, and then put the windows down, keep the music level the same, and record for another minute to see, is there a difference? And that assumes that the external sound on the road in traffic has remained the same. Yeah.
Quick question. For if you were an artist on tour for like a week, 2 weeks, would you need to take time after the tour or the concert length to have some quiet time for like a week or so?
So best to do it on a daily basis. So again, when we discuss the best, I can't remember the term, best procedures, best practices for musicians and recording professionals, those 12 hours of auditory rest are very helpful. So if at all possible, right, after you've had your session for the day or your day's work, try to have some quiet time. Again, not in silence. You don't have to plug the ears, but away from, then don't decide to mow the lawn or, go to a restaurant or a bar with a live band. Yeah. I think we'll take 2 more.
I find that most of my hearing loss is by, not by myself and my own volume, but with others and my bandmates in particularly. Is there some way that you think, like, you can convince other people that maybe don't care as much about their hearing to maybe, like, either at least care for themselves or, like, turn out, like, something like that?
Yeah, and that's actually a very good point, right? Where you all may be cognizant of the risks of noise and care genuinely for your hearing, but other people, your bandmates or classmates or whoever might not. I always think that education really is the best way to reach someone. It can be simple facts like once you've damaged your hearing, it's gone forever. The information about the cost of hearing aids, right? Where if you do incur permanent hearing loss and it does affect you, generally you're going to put out thousands of dollars to solve the problem. Just being aware of loud sound. So again, pulling out the sound level meter saying, oh my gosh, this is 108 decibels. that's exceedingly loud. Yeah, I think education probably would be the best way to reach them.
Do you think that like a long-term exposure to loud sounds, maybe at a lower level, is more or less dangerous than like sudden loud sounds, or does it like not matter?
It does matter to some degree, mostly because those brief exposures, for example, like a gunshot, like if you're into riflery and you go to the range, that brief exposure, in theory, could do more damage simply because it's 140 or 50 decibels. That brief exposure would take probably a full day at 90 decibels to meet, and probably you're still going to be over your noise dose for the day with that one brief exposure. Yeah.
All right, unfortunately, we're out of time. I would like to thank very, very much Dr. Costlow for coming in and speaking to us about this. This was recorded, so this will be posted soon. If you want to re-watch this, it'll be
Share it with your
mc3.edu/masterclass. And please do yourselves a favor, go schedule a hearing test, go get a checkup now rather than later. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.